What I would like to do is walk through several key questions and give you my thoughts on the answers to those questions. I know you have thousands of questions, but let's start with some fundamentals. What's happened over the last day? Fundamentally, I authorized the filing of a bankruptcy, and Kevyn Orr has followed through, and that bankruptcy filing has occurred in federal court. So that's what's happened. The next question is, why did this happen? In terms of the why, this goes back to 60 years of downward decline in the city of Detroit. If you go back to 1950, Detroit was a city of 1.8 million people. Now it's a city of 680-some thousand people. It's a dramatic decline. And with that have come multiple problems and consequences that feed on one another. If you look at the liabilities of the city, the financial condition of the city is basically broke. It has $18 billion in liabilities. That's an unsustainable level of debt. Currently, it's paying 38 cents on the dollar towards legacy costs. If nothing was to be done, that number would grow to 65 cents on the dollar by 2017. Again, an unsustainable level. In addition to that, we all know so many other facts that show how difficult the situation is. Blight in Detroit. There are 78,000 structures that are abandoned that need to come down in some fashion. If you look at services to citizens, which is the most critical issue, we're at unacceptable levels there. You can look at many different things, but let's talk about briefly the crime situation in Detroit. The response times in the city of Detroit for police calls is 58 minutes versus a national average of 11 minutes. Again, an unacceptable level of service. To put it in perspective, though, that's not a recent development. If you look at the statistics for Detroit and you go back to 1985, 27 years, for 24 of those years, Detroit was in the top 10 most violent cities. 24 of those years. To answer the question, what about the other three? It was 11th, 14th, and didn't report 1 year. That's a tragic situation. So if you look at the history of this has been a long period of decline. It's time to do something about it. And so that gets to my next question. What does this mean with this bankruptcy filing? We're going to get into a lot of legal issues, but let's step back from that for a minute to say this is the time to say enough is enough in terms of the downward decline of Detroit. The 700,000 people of Detroit deserve a better answer. What this does by going to bankruptcy court is give us one forum to say let's address these issues in a thoughtful, deliberate fashion. And this has been done after going through a very deliberative process to come to that decision and to recognize there were no other viable alternatives. But now we can address the debt question. Part of the bankruptcy court is the city will present a plan with a plan of adjustments for those debts. Currently, those creditors have a situation where they don't know what they're going to get paid and if they get paid at all. Going through this process will allow us to give them some certainty to say this is a debt that can be paid and will be paid. If you look at the more important issue of services to citizens, again, the levels are currently unacceptable. We need to do better, and we will do better. And that involves putting a plan of investment forward through the bankruptcy court to say here are investments that can be made to improve the services to citizens. That's critically important. I deeply respect the citizens of Detroit. They deserve a better answer, and they hired me to get a better answer. So let's work together on making that happen. Now, what are the next steps in this process? To be really simple, today is business as usual in Detroit. That's one thing I want to assure the citizens, that people are still coming to work, they're still going to get paid, regular services are going on, although I don't define regular services as good enough. Kevin can talk about the particulars of bankruptcy, but I want to step back and look at the big picture here for a minute. If you look at it, Detroit has a tremendous number of positive things going on. Very exciting things. If you look what's going on in the business community, jobs are coming into Detroit. The outstanding work of Dan Gilbert in terms of buying real estate and developing that real estate. Wonderful things like a new hockey arena with the Illich family continuing to do their major investments in the city. Things like M1. There are so many tremendous things going on. In addition to that, young people are moving to Detroit. We're seeing that every day in terms of occupancy in Midtown and downtown being 95% plus. We need to continue the path on improving things in the neighborhoods, though, too. This needs about all parts of Detroit need to be moving forward. But there are a number of positives. The last major obstacle, in my view, to really creating an environment for growth in Detroit is the city government. Again, because of the strangling debt load and the need for improved services. So many people may step back and say, this is the lowest point in Detroit's history. The history books may say that. What would happen if we didn't do this act? Detroit would continue to go downhill, and it wouldn't be the lowest day in Detroit's history. That day would continue day after day, and that's not right, again, for the citizens. There are too many people walking to school, trying to make a livelihood in the city, that are putting up with things that just don't make sense and shouldn't happen. So this is our opportunity to say this may be the low day, but this is the day to stabilize Detroit. This is the day to say, let's solve that debt problem. Let's solve that service problem. Let's create a Detroit that then can grow and flourish. Because the growth of Detroit is critically important for all of us. Most importantly, for the hardworking, great citizens of Detroit that I view as my customers, that I was hired by them along with 9 million other people of the state of Michigan to serve. Let's get Detroit on the path to being a great city again, because that's critically important to all of Michigan. We are the comeback state in Michigan, but to be a great state, we need that path of Detroit being on the path to being a great city again. Today is a major step in getting on that path to say the downward spiral, it's time to stop. It's time to move forward. It's time to get Detroit stabilized and to grow. So I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Kevyn Orr. And I want to compliment Kevyn Orr for his outstanding work, because I had to approve this and I'm responsible for these actions, but he's doing an outstanding job of implementing these actions and making sure we're doing the right thing for those wonderful citizens of our city. So with that, Kevyn.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. We didn't make this decision improvidently or in haste. This has been a decision that in one fashion or another has been working its way to the city for the better part of 6 decades. More acutely, just in the past few years, for those of you that know, since 2005, when we took out $1.5 billion supposedly to address pension issues at that point, and defaulted on that obligation in 2009 and pledged casino revenue to address that default. And then in 2011, entered into another series of agreements, the consent agreement, to try to set up a rubric to address those prior failures. We're finally at a point where we simply cannot kick the can down the road any further. We must address these issues and restore services to the citizens of the city. With that, I'd be happy to start taking any questions.
Take a look at this. The first thing that many people want to know is the issue of what's for sale, the bank buildings and the BIA, how we do public cars in the city's portfolio. What is to become of those? How they become assets of the city that can be gone after by creditors. So what becomes of that, and where's your position on where this is headed?
Well, right now there's nothing for sale, including Howdy Doody. We in the city are giving a respite, some breathing room right now with the filing of Chapter 9 and the automatic stay. We put forward a proposed plan of adjustment on June 14th, which we thought would have addressed some of these questions, but also would have given our stakeholders the opportunity to come in and have discussions, and we're continuing those discussions. In fact, even yesterday and this morning, we're going to continue discussions with some creditors that we hope to be able to announce yet another settlement soon. So we're still going forward in the ordinary course with the city. We're trying to reach resolution with our stakeholders, and we're not going to address the issues of what we're going to sell because, frankly, that's an open item to be dealt with in the future. Yes?
How quickly are residents of the city of Detroit going to see some of these vital services that you guys speak of that are so necessary? When are we going to finally start to see some changes? The 58-minute police response time that's been talked about across the nation. All that.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. First of all, you have a new police chief that's delving into those issues even as we speak. We have the opportunity with what the mayor did of getting the new cars and EMS units coming online within the next 60 days. There's also been a purchase order already entered for an additional 50 cars to come online, so we'll get better response times for the city. And with this respite, with the bankruptcy filing, we'll have the opportunity to take some of the money that I took out when we did the default on June 14th with our swaps payment and use that for improvement. We stood up the Public Lighting Authority. We sent out an RFP RFP to deal with solid waste. We've stood up a blight authority. So in direct response to your question, we put in place some of these structures to address this, and I anticipate the citizens of the city will start seeing these changes within the next 30 to 60 days very acutely. The young woman on the corner. Yes, ma'am.
To file for bankruptcy under federal law. You're not a city official. You're not representing you're not the municipality. Address that.
Yes, sure. Actually, under 436, I stay in the place instead of the city council and the mayor. As you recall, I delegated some authority to them when I first came in, but under the statute, I am the representative of the city. And with the order that I filed after the governor approved the request that I made under the statute to file, I do have the authority to file. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Matt.
Matt. Hi, Matt.
There have been some complaints from creditors and some of the union and pension folks that the negotiations were one-sided. It was kind of this is our offer, take it or leave it, and they're accusing you in particular of some bad faith.
Sure.
Negotiations
Sure.
to address those concerns.
Sure, I've heard those concerns, and as I said, Matt, when I came in, I wanted to offer a sincere olive branch. I said that on March 13th and 14th. On the 25th, I reiterated that question and reached out again. On June 10th, when I had my open meeting, I said the same thing. Look, we don't have time. I need you to come in. We need to discuss. On June 14th, at the all-hands meetings of stakeholders, unions, and creditors, we had that. Some of these constituencies took that up, and in fact, I've announced recently some settlements, and we'll be in a position, I hope, within the near term to announce more. Some others, for whatever reason, despite my entreaties and my overtures for them to come in, decided to sue me. We stood by when both the governor and the treasurer, and most recently myself and the governor, were sued, and still continue to negotiate with those parties, to the chagrin of many people who said, when are you finally going to stop this? Because it could go on forever, Matt. And what I was saying throughout that time is I've got an 18-month term to do a lot of work, and we do not have time to run in place as we would in an ordinary course to go forward. I made that abundantly clear. So anyone who thinks that I wasn't negotiating in good faith, when they're suing me, I ask you to look at that context, that your decision, instead of coming to the table with me, is to continually file suits against me. Who's not operating in good faith? Yes. Yes.
Mr. Orr, did you make a last-minute call to the White House for any sort of bailout or any sort of help to keep from going into bankruptcy?
Well, I'm not going to comment on what I said to the White House, but no, in direct response to your question. Yes, sir. Hey, good morning.
The majority of the unsecured debt affects retired people.
Yes.
So are we going to rescue Detroit on the backs of people that actually built it?
Charlie, I'm not going to characterize as resting. I mean, there's $12 billion of debt. Roughly $9.2 billion of that is 5.7 is OPEB, and about 3.5 has to do with unfunded pension obligations. The OPEB, which is healthcare, is totally unfunded. And now I'll put aside the question of how that happened over the past 20, 30 years, and no one set aside a dime to deal with healthcare for the citizens. But the reality is, in a bankruptcy, there are two types of creditors. There are secured and there are unsecured. And what you must do is treat people in their classes, secured and unsecured, equally. We have said we're not going to impair the secured class, the DWSD bonds and some others. We've said we will treat everyone in the unsecured class equally because that's what's required under the law. How that breaks out is a function of the math, but it's the math. It's just the way it is.
Bankole over here.
Hey, Bankole.
Kevin, let's put aside the creditors for a minute. Let's look at the pensioners and the labor how labor factors into it. Because we see the back and forth between the creditors. What about labor and pensioners? Where do they fit in?
Well, as I just said to Charlie's question, that's a big part of it. That's a big chunk of change. But let me address that acutely. We have $1 billion budget, and as the governor said, 38% of that is legacy cost, debt service. Another 48% of that, or almost 80%, are fixed costs for police, fire, EMS. Right. So we have approximately 20% that we use for everything else. Every pothole, every snowplow, every garbage. Everything else is about $200 million. Of that $11 to $12 billion of unsecured debt, if we took that $200 million and did nothing else in the city, another pothole, another snow doesn't get plowed, no garbage gets picked, did everything else within the city, it would take us over 50 years to pay that debt. So there's no way home from that equation. There's no amount of revenue that we could generate to try to address it. So we have to treat it in this fashion in bankruptcy, which is what's normal.
This gentleman over here.
Yes, sir.
How come you're offering 10 cents on the dollar to pension funds, but agreed to
That's a very good question. The $2 billion note that we're proposing for unsecured was the only mechanism we could come up with to offer the unsecured creditors some form of recovery given the realities of our budget situation. The Merrill Lynch UBS settlement, they're secured creditors. They had liens on both our casino revenue as well as the $40 million payment that I defaulted on June 14th. As secured creditors, to impair their interests, we had to make an adjustment. But more important than that, they agreed to release their liens. They have agreed to not seek to recover against their insurer. They have agreed to allow us access of $180 million of annual revenue, which if you look at the plan proposal we put out on June 14th, requires cash flow of at least that much to address the $125 million a year we want to use for blight remediation, for health, safety, and welfare concerns over the next 10 years. We would have no plan. We would have no course, no plan of adjustment without that revenue. In addition to them releasing their liens, they agreed to give us a discount on the swap obligation that we had, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of $350 million, which was signed years and years ago. The total value of that resolution to the city is somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $80 million, plus the $180 million we get for a secured party agreeing to give up their security interest. That's why we did that deal. I'd be happy to listen to any other plan someone can come up with, given the restraints that we're working under. The reality is, with the $12 billion in unsecured debt, there's precious little we can do.
Alexis, over here,
Allison.
you presented a progressive plan in terms of investment in the city and different things to do with, to really invest in the city of Detroit. How does bankruptcy help achieve those goals, and will it maybe make it easier to make those things happen?
Well, bankruptcy is, as I've said time and again, bankruptcy is a tool in our toolbox to get at the goals that we want to achieve in the proposal that we made on June 14th. I think one, in direct response, Allison, to your question, one, it gives us breathing room. As you know, we were being sued almost on a weekly basis, and that's the very thing I had asked, I pleaded for not to happen. I had asked to have a consensual resolution. For whatever reason, people decided that's not what they wanted to do. Fair enough. People are entitled to act in their own interest. Number two, it gives us a forum, as the governor just said, to bring all parties in. A significant percentage of parties that we have to speak to are unrepresented, the retirees. What you will see in the papers that we're filing is a request by the court to appoint, we are moving to appoint a retiree committee. So we will have someone to speak to in all fairness, in an abundance of fairness. And I recognize some practitioners will say, that's not a smart move. You're asking to appoint an opponent in your case. But we think that's what's fair. And we're going to try to do this in a fair way. In addition, in freeing up the cash flow, it allows us to focus on the key issue that the governor has reiterated again and again, the health, safety, and welfare of 700,000 citizens in the city of Detroit. Yes, there are 9,700 employees, and there are 19,700, 20,000 retirees, but there's 700 citizens who don't deserve a 55-minute response time, who don't deserve endemic blight and crime, who don't deserve no hope and future and just continued debt over debt and borrowing. So we have to do this in some fashion, and bankruptcy will allow us to achieve that in some way.
What shocked you most when you looked through the books? Was there a particular element of the finances that really stunned you?
I think the depth and some of the practices deferring pension obligation years after. What shocked me wasn't the numbers, because you can put zeros behind digits and create more numbers. What shocked me was the tolerance for this behavior for decades. This has been going on for a very long time, and to say the least, it is at best unorthodox in terms of how these things were going. Frankly, I'm surprised that I know a lot of people outraged at my appointment, my take. I wish there had been a lot more outrage over the past 10, 20 years.
Chris, over here.
Question. I want to clarify something. Does the swap between $180 million a year?
Yes. Casino revenue comes in at approximately $180 million, and if we defaulted, that would have been their security interest. We would not have had access to that cash flow. I think we have. There's technical as far as signature pages, whether or not they've been exchanged. There's some other documents we have to follow up on, but we have that agreement in principle, and it's dialed in.
What was this from Hamlin's background? Pension board filings?
No, the fact that we're running out of time. I've got 15 months left on my tenure. I promised the governor that we were going to try to get this done within the time frames provided by the statute. There's a lot of work to be done here, even within that 15 months. We got 3 work streams. We have to deal with the creditor interest, we have to deal with the labor interest, and we have to deal with operations for the city. The statute imposes certain obligations on me on the back end. I've got to have a 2-year budget. I've got to look at charter reform, perhaps. There are issues regarding investigations and appointments and other contracts in the ordinary course. There's a lot of work to be done here in 15 months. We're dealing with 60 years of deferred maintenance in 18 months. I can't afford to spend time running in place again and again and again to address the very issues I'm here supposed to be doing.
Or are you going to open
over here from
Hey, Kurt.
into the pension obligations?
Please, Kurt, we're taking our turns, please.
I'm sorry, Kurt, please. Thank you. That's a good question. What we've said to the vendors is we're going to work in the ordinary course. There may be a glitch in some checks that were sent out last week that we're going to have a hotline that they can call so that those checks can be addressed and their issues. But generally speaking, especially going forward, let's talk about the filing yesterday. Going forward in the ordinary course is business as usual. We will pay our bills. In fact, we may end up paying our bills a little bit quicker than usual. Some of the other bills that came in before we filed, we're going to try to pay the majority of those. 80%, I think, are below $5,000 or so, and we're going to pay those, especially those that are critical vendors related to health, safety, and welfare, police, and fire. We're going to take care of those. Those that may get caught in the gap or may have questions, we're going to have a hotline they can call to decide how we're going to address those issues. But frankly, we're going to try to pay our bills on time for once.
You talk about the urgency and the need to get things moving. There seems to be considerable debate about how long the bankruptcy process will take. How confident are you that this can be something that takes months, maybe a year, rather than something that goes on for years?
Well, I think the issues that we have to address regarding the city's insolvency and the magnitude, and what we tried to do in the first 90 days was to put all that information out there so we wouldn't be debating the extent of the debt, what we have to address. And we seem to have had some success with that because nobody's saying the city's not insolvent or it's not $18 billion. Everybody agrees with that. Secondly, we will have an eligibility fight, I suspect, in the court, and that's why we filed today with our papers a request by the judge who has yet to be appointed, a scheduling process so that we can bring some order to the process. So people who have objections will make them and we'll respond, and there'll be that determination. Once we get by that, frankly, because there are 2 impaired classes, and then two classes, one is unimpaired and one is going to be impaired. The secured classes are going to be unimpaired, so we put them to the side, and that's mostly bond debt related to water. But for the unsecured, it's a large number, but it's a finite world. And the issue that we propose is give them some level of recovery will be debated, but as far as what we can do based upon the cash flows that the city has, there's not a whole lot of room for movement. It's not like we're going to go from being able to create a $2 billion note to creating a $10 billion note. We don't have the cash flow to service that even if we could. Okay, so it's going to be finite, and that's why I'm highly confident we can do this within the time that I have left during my tenure. Of course, the best laid plans can go awry once the first shot is fired, but we're going to try to keep to that timetable.
I apologize, we're almost running out of time, so we're going to do 2 last questions. It's
Sorry.
Jim Kirchner, Channel 7, and then Sarah Swick from Pin Radio. And then we'll have to wrap it up, but they'll be available.
Oh, Jim? Yeah. Okay. Hey, Jim.
What are your worst concerns going into this largest judicial proceeding? How important is the judge and the city will be appointed? That judge's personality, where to the chief's office. What are your worst fears going into these uncovered
I wouldn't say it's over the question of the judge because they're very competent bankruptcy judges. And we have confidence that we're going to get a good judge. So the biggest fear is this whole process is making sure that we can have a great dialogue with the citizens of Detroit, in my view. Because it's just, much as you said, bankruptcy is a term that none of us ever wanted to get to this point. And one of the first things I was concerned about are people going to think the police aren't going to come anymore or something's going to stop. And that's why we really wanted to have this to reassure the citizens of Detroit normal operations continue. People will be paid. People can do services. But I also want to emphasize, I don't view this as a terrible answer in the sense that now's our opportunity to stop 60 years of decline. This is fundamental. Has anyone liked the Detroit of 5 years ago, of 10 years ago, of 15 years ago? How long has this gone on and people had not stopped to say, stop kicking the can down the road and do something? We are doing something. This is the forum, this is the place to do it in. This is the place to deal with the debt question. This is the place to put a plan for improved services for the citizens. There are tremendously good things going on in Detroit outside of city government. Let's support those by resolving city government and getting on a positive path. So when you ask the worst case, I don't dwell on that. There's a lot of hard work, difficult work to do. That work will get done. And we will come out with a stronger, better Detroit and a format to grow the city. Because the citizens of this, not only the city, but the state deserve it. And we're going to give them good service.
Great. And Sarah's our closer. And then with that, we'll get our TV folks so we can get back there. So Sarah, your last question, please.
Yeah, Mr. Orr, you mentioned before that Chapter 9 is skewed towards the municipality. The city really, in many ways, has the power to set the terms. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and how do you plan to leverage that?
Yeah, well, the doctrine of Chapter 9 is skewed that way, but it's really not towards the city. It's towards the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, because that's how it should be. You know, does anybody think it's okay to have 40-year-old trees growing through the roofs of dilapidated houses? Does anybody think our children should walk through the streets dark home from school at night in October? Does anybody think that they should call the police and not be able to come on time because they're already out on calls? No. So the doctrine of Chapter 9 is designed to address those very questions. I recognize it's a lever. Even under that admonition, we are trying very hard to be fair. We are asking ourselves for a process by judges. Bankruptcy judges handle everything from stores to shipping companies. I mean, they're remarkably competent in this regard. But to manage this process and also have everyone represented, including retirees, who we asked on June 14th, we asked some of the labor organizations, will you represent retirees? And some of them said no. We won't. So we're going to ask for that representation. We will be fair even under the guise of Chapter 9 and the doctrine that it provides for the benefit of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Orr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.